And welcome back, folks. We are glad you are here. This is Michael Yates with the Ridgeview Pod, where, as you know, we try to cover everything hope, healing, and recovery related. You know, we always enjoy having community representatives in to spend some time with us and tell us what's going on. My guest today is Amanda Taylor. Amanda, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, the reason I wanted to have you join us today, maybe, I don't know, pandemics seem to warp my sense of time. So I'm not sure how long ago this was, maybe 3 years ago. I first met you at a function. It was related to like a homeless coalition, maybe. But there was a group of community stakeholders that were there. And I think you were there as a representative of First Baptist Clinton. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, we were. Our church was hosting meetings of community representatives to discuss the problem of homelessness and the resource gaps that we have for homelessness and how we might problem solve some of those. And so those meetings, I guess, lasted for maybe a year and a half. Were fairly successful, but then fizzled out after that. And so, yeah, I think that was one of the first times we met. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. I think so.
And then First Baptist Clinton hosted a RAM clinic.
Yes.
And Ridgeview was fortunate enough to have a booth there as folks were leaving the dental portion of the clinic, which was a great opportunity for us just to help, make sure folks had information about, other behavioral health services in the community that they may benefit from.
Yes.
So I saw you at that one as well. And then you reached out about a community health fair. So this was pre-pandemic was the first one.
Yes, it was.
The
year right before, so 2019 would have been that one.
Yeah. So I'm curious. First, I think it's exactly what a church should be doing, is providing stuff like that for the community. That's part of its mission to the citizens of the community. But where did that idea come from?
Well, that idea originally I'd seen community resource fairs, or as a church often calls them, mission fairs. I've seen that at other churches. Sometimes they'll have them, or colleges will have, where all the different community service organizations are there, and you can learn about them and know how to plug into them, and if you want to participate. And so I'd seen those before, but the idea really came from a combination of two people, and I don't know who had the idea first, but Tom Burge was the Clinton Baptist Association director of missions, and so he was mentioning one day he thought something like that would be great to have for our community. And then our former pastor, Stan Elliott, he had the same idea, and perhaps they were talking, I'm not sure. But after that, it took a couple years to materialize, but we did kind of a smaller version, like you say, at the RAM clinic. So we invited a few, and I don't know, maybe we had 20 different agencies there, just so that since all the community was coming, a lot of the community was coming to that event, that they could see what resources were available to further help them if they had any other needs. And that went fairly well. And I thought, well, we could do this maybe on a larger scale and put it in the gym and just see who comes and see what comes of it. And so, so from there, we decided to try it, and we had a pretty good, successful first time. I guess maybe 40 something agencies participating, and then this past time we had 68 originally sign up, and then we had 4 of them had to cancel out at the last minute, so we ended up with 64 different helping agencies, which is wonderful. You'll see events like this, on a smaller scale, in the community sometimes, but never that really. I've not seen that many coming together to work together for something. And I really think that the origins, for me, of that's how it came about. But sometimes I get in the middle of communicating with everybody and organizing, thinking, why do we really do this? This is a lot of work. Why is it worth doing something like this? But I think for me, it's a fundamental idea that I always come back to that makes it worthwhile for me, and that is that I see a lot of needs around me, and I think that we as people our goal is to help those in need around us. I think that's something that we as people need to do. Maybe perhaps our reason for living, and I see that as my reason for living, and particularly because of my faith, following God, in that service and showing Christ's love to the community. But for sorry, I just lost track of my thought a little bit there. But that's But if that's our purpose
Mhm.
for doing it, I look around with especially all the people that approach me in my job, and I see so many different needs, and I realize that my personal resources are not enough to help the people in need that I see around me. I don't have the
Mhm.
time, I don't have the energy, I don't have the money, and I get overwhelmed
Mhm.
feeling. And I realize that it's got to be more bigger than me.
Mhm.
But I also look at my church and I realize that we can't meet all the utility bills, all the transportation needs. We can't take all the steps to helping people get out of homelessness. And I
Mhm.
realize it's got to be bigger than the church.
Mhm.
And but I really, really believe that if we come together as a community,
Mhm.
that we can meet the needs of our community. And I think it takes that. So I think something like the community resource fair, not only does it help those in need that may wander in, to see what
Mhm.
resources are there to help them, resources of all different kinds, from disabilities to mental health to
Mhm.
physical health to education to children to elderly, everything, everybody that we can get to come at least. Not only does it help them, but it also we've seen a great benefit of helping our agencies to communicate
Mhm.
together. Because we often find as helping agencies that here we are doing this and we didn't realize somebody else was doing helping
Mhm.
the same need or trying to do the same thing. So we can correlate and communicate,
Mhm.
but also we discover that there are some gaps that nobody's taking care of, and perhaps I don't know. It just all works better when we can communicate and when we work together as a community. And so I really think that that's kind of the best model for serving our community. But I think for me, it's just personally. Um, Also, I think for the individuals that come, I was using the phrase this year, a walking resource fair. I know we're not going to get all the people in need to come
Mhm.
in,
Mhm.
but for me, I think my goal as a church for the community, representing, is that I wanna make myself as knowledgeable. If my ability to help the people in need around me is limited by my
Mhm.
knowledge of community resources, then I need to find all the resources that I can, learn about them, so that when somebody approaches me in
Mhm.
need, I'll say, "Hey, you need to go to here, or you need to go to
Yeah.
here, or you can
Is
find that
is that
here."
part of your role with the church?
It is, yeah, yeah. So what I was saying is, I hope that the people will, that as community members, not those in people in need, but
Mhm.
those interested in helping people around, I hope they'll come to community resource fair and they'll learn and they'll become like walking resource fairs out in the community,
Right, right.
for whoever they may find that are in need if we educate ourselves. Yeah, my role in the church, I'm the minister of missions and the director of creative ministries, which means I get
Uh,
all the fun stuff basically
right,
at
right.
JFK. Um, but but our church has a a mission statement. It says is to be a Christ-like fellowship where the lost and the lonely and the hurting and the needy and the suffering people in our community will be accepted and can experience the joy of God's grace in their lives.
Yeah.
And they say, our church says that we are a church in the heart of Clinton, and so we want to be very community minded. And so if that's our goal, I think that having something like this is just a logical step.
Yeah.
Plus, we have the space, we have a lot of tables, and we have a lot of chairs.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Put it
so
to
so why,
use.
yeah, yeah.
Well, you mentioned a couple things there, and just anecdotally, having seen and experienced some of this, even at this most recent fair.
Mhm.
So one of your parishioners came in. Uh, my coworker Melody Morris, who was with me that day, she recognized her, and she was there to actually drop off some pots and pans for another coworker at our recovery housing, which is located in La Follette.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so here was, watching this connection take place
Yeah.
around the provision of just some basic kitchen uh, utensils
Yeah,
to help someone on their road to recovery. I thought was, wow,
absolutely.
this is Interestingly, that as we're recording this month's podcast, the two previous guests also brought up the importance of connection
Hmm.
and how we are hardwired for
Hmm.
connection, and that building those links to one another is part of a community's overall health,
Yes.
and leads to better uh, well-being for all citizens if we can do that. So
And I think the agencies really, whether or not we want to admit it, I think we really do work together better
mhm,
when we can see each other face to face. We recognize
yeah,
each other, and because we, for instance, there's a lot of cool little moments. But our church had been communicating with the CDC's representative, from the health department, in our community
yeah,
a lot over different COVID, things. Do we need to close because somebody had COVID in our building?
right,
Different things
right.
like that. So we'd been talking to that person forever, but we had never met her in person. Didn't have a face with a name, and it was really cool to get to, see that.
Yeah.
And it just reminded me that there's so often that I think that when we have these face to face conversations and the agency leaders feel more friendly with each other, it's easier to pick up the phone and text somebody and say, "Hey, are y'all doing this?" Or, it just I think we work together better when we know each other a little
Yeah.
better.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. And again,
if I didn't
you,
know you, Michael, I might say, come to a podcast for if somebody that I don't know for something that I don't know. I don't
right.
think so, but it's just like, oh, that's Michael. Okay, I'll,
Yeah.
I'll come on over for
It's
that.
it's
So,
it's safe. I can trust them.
right.
Yeah, I mean, Ridgeview's table was positioned next to Cherokee Systems table. So Cherokee has a clinic in Clinton. Now, the gal that was at the table, so she dutifully had her, her face covering on, but I thought, I think I know her
Uh
just
huh.
from her eyes.
Yeah.
So at one point I go over, I say, I introduce myself. She pulls her mask down, and she and I were in uh, had uh, a strange connection through a mutual friend who I was biking with and she was running with, and we had just met each other like the weekend before in, of all places, Knoxville.
Well,
So
yeah.
completely different community, but it was like, sometimes you just can't make this stuff up. It
No, no,
just,
you
this
can't.
stuff happens and you're like, wow, this is really cool. It's now great to put a face and a name with a sister agency in the community,
Yeah,
Cherokee. So,
it is.
uh, yeah, we'll put that picture up in the podcast as well. So everyone, I think, the this work is really hard work.
Yeah.
It it takes a lot out. As you mentioned, you cannot pretend to know all the resources out there. You can't be the solution for everybody.
Hmm.
So what do you do to take care of yourself?
Oh goodness, that's tough. It really is, and I've especially found, I think, unfortunately, during COVID, I don't know what it's like working at, some of the, nonprofits perhaps, but at least in churches sometimes, there are a lot of positive things at churches happening in COVID first. Let me say there really are.
Mhm.
But also, I think that when everybody gets stressed, we see residual effects of the stress and the anxiety coming out. And sometimes that's, people wanting to control things, a little bit more. People are grasping for control of
Mhm.
things. And a lot of times it's you want to tell your church staff, this is how it needs to be done. This is the problems with the church. And so we're
Mhm.
finding that we get a whole lot more complaints and a whole lot more of just uh, it's a struggle sometimes to stay positive. And so
Mhm.
for me, sometimes that's, needing to check out from all those voices that you're hearing all the time and to get around some positive people,
Mhm.
or to just focus on the positive things. Maybe to find right now, it's not in my job, but I'm playing the piano with the praise team just because it's an outlet for me.
Mhm.
There's something that I can learn and do something that's different, something musical. Um, that's kind of a self care thing as
Mhm.
well. But I think really just the struggle to stay positive, but also to kind of zoom out a little bit, and to remind yourself why you're doing all of this,
Mhm.
and to try to balance. When you have somebody, let's take, say, I have a case of someone who's experiencing homelessness, to try to balance. Okay, how do I help systemically the problem in the community, like with
Mhm.
resource fairs and all that kind of stuff, and how much of my time can I spend, driving this person around to where they need to go, and helping
Mhm.
this person. Trying to balance that is very tricky, for me, um, because I think that it takes both.
Mhm.
We need to be service leaders. We need to, pitch in and do a lot of things. But for me, the zooming out, I think comes to,
Mhm.
I was working overseas for a while, doing mission work, hoping to share, God's love with the world, but hoping to
Mhm.
relieve some suffering in some ways. But I had the same overwhelming feeling like, there's so many problems. What is one little person, going halfway
Mhm.
around the world going to help these situations? And I just felt so almost despairing. And I thought it takes somebody bigger than me. It
Mhm.
takes, and I really, was convinced, at the time, that's the church reaching out to the world. But I found that there was a lot of, that the church had done a lot of damage globally,
Mhm.
colonialism, and
Mhm.
just the ideas that still stem from that. And so I often was saying, well, I know that the church did this to you, or the church said this, but that's not Jesus. That's not
Mhm.
God. That's not what God is about. And it was so frustrating, because we think of, Jesus as the head of the church, which is the body. And you
Mhm.
can't separate the head from the body, or else it just
Mhm.
doesn't cease to exist. But I was in my mind trying to separate it out like that. Just kind of became convinced that, perhaps the best thing I can do for the world is maybe not to could try to convince the world of God's love, and his concern and for their needs, but to maybe try to convince the church of
Mhm.
it,
Mhm.
sort of. And I'm not downing the church. I work in the church. I see
Sure.
the good and the beauty of the church, and overseas I did.
Mhm.
But there was enough negative things going on that it made me think that, perhaps, you got to start on your front doorstep,
Yeah.
So that, combined with a lot of different circumstances, has put me doing church work,
Yeah.
right now. And I'm lucky to work in a place that's as supportive and encouraging and has a mission statement like this. And as long as we have that on the front of the
Yeah.
bulletins, that's
Sure.
the mark that I'm striving to
Right.
hit and to work towards. And so when I zoom out and I just see that this is the reason why I'm doing this, and I
Yeah.
hope in some small way at the end of the day that I can make some small difference, whether it's a smile
Yeah.
to a person who's just lost a loved one, or, a hug, a word of encouragement to somebody who's discouraged. I just
Yeah.
try to zoom out and think, what's this all
Yeah.
for really? And to try to have perspective. So some
Yeah.
positive and some perspective, I think helps me. But sometimes it's just distraction. I go home,
Yeah.
I have to watch some Andy Griffith, take a hot bath, play. We got a couple of goats and a dog, and play with them.
There
I've
you
got a
go.
beautiful daughter. Watch her run around and
Yeah.
laughing.
There
You
you
just
go.
have to disconnect a little bit
Well, what
sometimes.
you described made me think of years ago. There was a I've used this before in some of the press releases that we've written, but Thomas Merton was responding to a colleague of his who had written him a letter of despair. So
Mm.
the colleague was in Southeast Asia. It was, mid to late 60s. And his colleague was despaired about the not only what was going on, but I think the lack of activity by the community of faith,
Yeah.
things of that
Mm-hmm.
sort. And
Disenchanting. Yeah.
Merton's reply back was, in time, you'll worry less about numbers and outcomes
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of thing, and you'll realize that it's the personal relationships that will ultimately save everything. And I thought, to your point, just tending to and being a good steward of the relationships that you
Yes.
can connect to and manage
Mm-hmm.
can be a catalyst for positive change. And
Yes.
that can beget other, positive
Yeah.
interactions. So, and that's part of
Yeah.
what the resource fair does,
Yeah,
I think.
and whether you're talking about, the analogy throwing starfish back, into
Uh,
the ocean,
uh,
um, whether you're thinking about it like that, but we really, in a philosophy of missions, we think that relationships are the key to that, and that means that I can throw food at people all day. I can throw clothes at them. I can have resource fair. I can have all this kind of stuff. But for a person in need, it really takes a relationship that is built, and that it can feel draining sometimes. Because it's this long-term thing, but everybody needs somebody to bridge that gap with them, to help them from wherever point they are of need to the point where they need to become to have a better
Yeah.
life. But that it really does take the relationships. But I think that for me, it's those moments, and I think if we don't have a church that's building relationships with people in need, they're missing these moments. But where everything seems worthwhile. For instance, I was over working in an AIDS orphanage in Africa, and there was a child, who had lost its parents and was sick with AIDS itself, and I was holding it, and he was just kind of, crying, softly. He was only 2 or 3 years old, and I was holding him and I was rocking him, and I just thought there was all the moons in my life seemed to align. Us up. There's nothing better that I can do in the world than to be in this moment to hold this child. And sometimes I search and I strive after those moments in my life where I can find those. And sometimes it's our church is right next to the tower. Sometimes it's going across and talking to somebody over the towers who's lonely, who's discouraged. And it's those moments that for me, in Matthew 25:35-40, it talks about Jesus in the least of these, that whatever you've done for the least of these, you do for me. And, call that moment what you want. But for me, it's realizing that I'm communing with my Savior in that moment, and that's where I get that energy and that inspiration and that drive to continue. So if I were just organizing resource fairs, all the time, I might get burnt out and discouraged, save for these little nice stories that we hear about people connecting. But I think for me, I really have to balance it with doing some hands-on ministry in the community, because it's those people that inspire me. It's those people that make my life feel worthwhile. They can, this same situation can be draining sometimes, but it's also the thing that can fill me up. And so I think everybody has a cup, and you have to balance it. Are you pouring into your cup, or are you pouring out, to the community? You have to have both some way.
Well, therein is the good news, and that's probably a perfect place for us to end. Amanda Taylor, thank you for coming in. I tell you what, before you or when you get to planning and scheduling your next resource fair, come on in.
Okay.
We'll talk about it, try to get the word out to
Would be wonderful.
The greater.
Yeah, we'd love more helping agencies, and especially getting the public to come
Yeah.
participate, to learn, so that we can be better community-minded citizens and help those in need around us.
Yeah.
It's always the goal to get
Great.
people to come to it.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me. I really
absolutely.
appreciate it.
And we appreciate you for tuning in. Thanks for spending part of your day with us. Please subscribe, ring the bell so that you receive notification of each week's latest episode. And take good care of yourself. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.